Imagine you're a Soviet surface-to-air missile operator in the late 1970s. You're part of the most feared air defense network in the world. Your radar is the eye in the sky, capable of spotting an enemy aircraft from hundreds of kilometers away. You feel invincible. Then, one day, your radar screen goes blank. An instant later, a deafening explosion rips through your position. What just happened? You've just met the AGM-88 HARM, America's answer to the SAM hunting problem, and a weapon that would completely change the rules of electronic warfare. To understand why the HARM was so revolutionary, we need to rewind a bit. During the Vietnam War, American pilots faced a terrifying threat. Soviet-made S-75 Dvina missile sites, what NATO called the SA-2 guideline. These missiles were guided by powerful fan-song radars. Early on, US pilots had to rely on visual warnings or basic radar warning receivers that would scream an alarm, telling them they were being painted by a SAM radar. The standard procedure was to dive, jink, and pray. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Americans responded with wild weasel missions. These were incredibly dangerous sorties, flown by specialized crews and aircraft like the F-105, Thunderchef, and later the F-4 Phantom. Their job was to deliberately bait the SAM sites into turning on their radars. Once the radar lit them up, the wild weasels would fire an anti-irradiation missile, like the AGM-88 Shrike. The Shrike was a game-changer, but it had its limits. It was relatively slow, and had a simple seeker that needed the enemy radar to stay on all the way to impact. If the Soviet crew got spooked and turned their radar off, the Shrike would lose its lock and fly harmlessly into the dirt. Soviet operators quickly learned this trick. They would switch their radars on and off in short bursts, a tactic known as blinking, making it nearly impossible for the Shrike to get a solid lock. The next generation was the AGM-78 standard arm. It was bigger, faster, and had a rudimentary memory circuit. This meant if the target radar shut down, the missile could remember its last known position and continue flying towards it. This was a huge improvement, but it was expensive and still not a perfect solution. The Soviets adapted again, developing more complex radar systems and tactics. The Cold War chessboard of electronic warfare was constantly evolving. Both sides were locked in a technological arms race, with every move met by a countermove. The US needed a true leap forward, a missile that was not just an improvement, but a complete paradigm shift. Enter the AGM-88 high-sped anti-irradiation missile, or HARM. Development began in the mid-1970s, and when it entered service in 1983, it was unlike anything seen before. The high-speed part of its name was no joke. The HARM could fly at over Mach 2, more than twice the speed of sound, giving enemy radar crews precious little time to react. If they detected a launch, they had seconds, not minutes, to shut down and hope for the best. But speed was only half the story. The real genius of the HARM was its brain. It had an advanced broadband seeker that could cover a huge range of frequencies. Earlier missiles were often pre-tuned on the ground to a specific radar type. The HARM could hunt for almost any radar out there, from early warning systems to the specific guidance radars of SAM batteries. This flexibility was crucial. Even more terrifying for the Soviet crews was its sophisticated digital processor and memory. The HARM had three incredible modes of attack. The first was self-protect. A pilot under attack could simply select the missile, and it would automatically prioritize the most immediate threat, illuminating his aircraft, lock on, and fire. It was a fire-and-forget lifesaver. The second mode was target of opportunity. The HARM's own seeker could passively scan the environment for enemy radar emissions without the launch aircraft even using its own radar. If it detected a juicy target, like a long-range search radar that just popped up, the pilot could lock it on his display and launch. The enemy might not even know an aircraft was nearby until the missile was already inbound. But the third mode was the most baffling and revolutionary: pre-briefed. This is where the HARM became a true hunter. Before a mission, intelligence would identify the coordinates of a known or suspected enemy air defense site. The HARM could be programmed with these coordinates before takeoff. The launch aircraft could then fly towards the area and fire the missile from a safe standoff distance, without ever getting a radar lock itself. Here's the brilliant part. The HRM would fly on autopilot towards the pre-programmed coordinates. As it got closer, its own sensitive seeker would activate, scanning the area for any active radar that matched its threat library. If a Soviet crew at that location made the fatal mistake of turning on their radar for even a second, the HARM would instantly lock on and dive in for the kill. From the perspective of the SAM crew, it was sheer terror. A missile would literally appear out of nowhere. They hadn't painted a target. Their warning receivers were silent, yet an American missile was screaming down on them. They were being destroyed by a weapon they couldn't see, from an attacker they couldn't detect. This ability fundamentally broke the Soviet tactics. Their entire defense strategy relied on the blinking technique. Turn the radar on, get a quick look, turn it off. But with the HARM loitering nearby, that brief moment of omission was a death sentence. To be safe, they had to keep their radars off. But an air defense system with its radar turned off is just a collection of useless metal on the ground. The HARM forced a terrible choice upon them. Turn on your radar and risk instant destruction, or keep it off and be completely blind and ineffective. The first major combat test for the HARM came in 1986 during Operation El Dorado Canyon, the US airstrikes against Libya. Libyan air defense sites, equipped with Soviet-made systems, were targeted. F-88 Hornets and A-7 Corsair IEs, acting as wild weasels, unleashed HARMs against the Libyan radar network. The results were devastating. The missile proved incredibly effective at suppressing and destroying the sites, paving the way for the main strike force to hit their targets with minimal losses. The world took notice. But the HARM's true coming-out party was the 1991 Gulf War. Iraq had a dense, sophisticated air defense network, built largely on Soviet and French technology. It was considered one of the most formidable in the world. On the opening night of Operation Desert Storm, a massive wave of HARM-equipped aircraft, including F-4G, Wild Weasels and F-A-1 ADC, led the charge. Their mission was to punch a hole through this network. They fired hundreds of HARMs in the opening hours, using all three attack modes. Iraqi radar operators who bravely turned on their equipment were systematically eliminated. Those who kept their radars off were rendered useless. The Allied air forces gained air supremacy with astonishing speed, and the HARM was a huge reason why. The psychological impact was just as significant as the physical destruction. Iraqi operators became terrified of turning on their radars. In some documented cases, they would just radiate for a split second, and Sutton not even long enough to guide a missile, just to trick their commanders into thinking they were still operational. The HARM didn't just destroy equipment, it shattered the confidence and morale of the entire enemy air defense command. The legacy of the HARM is profound. It proved that in modern warfare, dominance of the electromagnetic spectrum is just as important as controlling the air or the sea. It forced a complete rethink of air defense doctrine around the world. New radars were designed to be more agile, using complex frequency hopping techniques to avoid detection. Tactics evolved to include decoys and emissive traps, but the HARM evolved too, with software and hardware upgrades, keeping it at the cutting edge for decades. It remains a frontline weapon for the US and its allies today, a testament to its revolutionary design. For those Soviet-trained crews, the HARM was a ghost, a silent predator in the electronic wilderness. It turned their greatest strength, their powerful radar, to their biggest vulnerability. It taught a harsh lesson of the Cold War. The moment you think you're invincible is the moment your enemy reveals a new technology that changes the game entirely. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into military tech.